Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Everyday Anarchism, the show that finds anarchism, non domination, cooperation, mutual aid in your everyday life. I am your host, Graham Culbertson. The episode you're about to hear was not recorded to be part of the Everyday Anarchism series. It's part of the Plumbing Game Studies series, and indeed, it wasn't supposed to be about anarchism at all. But as soon as my guest and I, Miguel Sicart, started talking, we started talking about Graeber. In fact, we started talking about Graeber before we started the interview, so what you're going to hear just starts in the middle where I hit record as Miguel and I are talking. So it's messy and disorganized, but I think you'll really enjoy it. It's quite anarchic. I also just wanted to use this little intro to give you some programming notes. So, with the new podcast, but more importantly, with a great deal of things that have happened at work and at home, I have not been able to work on the podcast like I would like. I do have some episodes coming out in the next few months. One on Chairman Mao with a friend and mentor of mine, Carl Girth, and one on the anarchist thinker Colin Ward. So you can look forward to those. I'm also hoping to finally wrap up the English Revolution series. And then at some point in time, I don't know when, I will have time to sit down and write episodes to finish the Debt series, but that will end in 2025, and honestly, the Debt series might be on hiatus until 2025. I just don't know. So episodes of Everyday Anarchism will continue to come out, I think, once or twice a month for the next few months, especially as I supplement them with episodes of Plumbing Game Studies, which I've recorded a number of those episodes and not had time to edit them. Just bear with me. I hope you enjoy these episodes. Maybe go back and listen to some of the older episodes if you're a newer listener and you're used to this coming out every week, and now the show's coming out once or twice a month. And I promise I will finish this Debt series. I just don't know when. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm very excited. I should be in London in July of 2025, so perhaps I will try and do some sort of meetup or event to finalize the Debt series then. That's almost a year away, but that may be how long it has to be for finishing this Debt series. All right, that's enough for me. Now, listen to the anarchic interview that Miguel Sicart and I did about Maria Lugones and David Graeber and games and anarchism and soccer and Pedro Almodovar and everything else. Enjoy.
One of them is Lugones and the other one is Graeber. So,
Oh,
like, to me,
wonderful.
all my work is kind of all my recent work is ping ponging between those two. So I should tell you that I think David Graeber wrote the best 10 pages of game studies of this century, which is in the Utopia of Rules,
Yeah.
when he goes through Heusing has Homo Ludens, and then he kind of, he has this beautiful way of putting it, which is it's a great theory about games, but not a really good theory of play. And it's so exactly on the spot of this, I think, critique that we need to do with game studies and with play studies and everything. That it's like, what are our assumptions? And I think Greber really nailed it there, and he's been a massive influence for me before he was even part of my working sort of references conversation. So you're a Greber scholar. That is wow. What is
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I am now. I became a Graeber scholar during the pandemic. Well, I quit my job. I had a horrible job, and then during the pandemic, it got worse, and so I quit it to start a podcast about David Graeber, and then the whole game stuff came later. I went back to teach at the department where I got my PhD in, and they're doing games there, and I said, okay, I'll do games. And then, actually, someone recommended T's work to me, and then it's fascinating. I'm struck right now that you say that you are working with Lugones and Graeber as your polarities. It's with the work that T Nguyen is doing right now. Suits and then James C. Scott are his polarities.
Yes.
So both of you actually have an anarchist thinker as one of your two, and that's crazy to me. I don't know. It's just fascinating.
But so the funny thing is that I know that T is working with what's it called, seeing like a state.
Yes.
I have a little bit of James C. Scott in some of my. I have way too many projects running, so I'm a horrible academic because, I promise myself I will do 20 million things and then I only
Yeah.
do one. But one of the things bounces on what Scott's short book on anarchism, Two Cheers for
Two cheers for
Anarchism.
anarchism.
Yes,
Yes.
so where he explains anarchism in a way that, because part of my interest right now, it's more of a mid to long term project, is to say, okay, so well, the world is ending. How should we play, right?
Yeah.
And what is the role of play in whatever new world will happen after the end of this world? And I keep coming back to perhaps the position of anarchism that's more ethical than political, the one where the imposition of power on other people, the creation of homogeneous communities where you acknowledge each other, you acknowledge the differences, but you also work together. I think that's a better foundation for whatever it's going to come. So I would say that I'm sort of ethically and perhaps also intellectually closer to anarchism now than what I've ever been. But I also think that that's exactly what play allows us to do. It's very difficult to have imaginaries of anarchism in daily life, right? Because we immediately go into like, okay, but who holds power?
Yeah.
Who enforces the rules? Except if we play in a way that it's not the classic way that we've been taught to play, right? The sort of the competition way of playing, the winning, the caring about the rules, but in which the rules are just the instruments we use to create this form of togetherness, a togetherness that it's not like the new games movement of the 1960s, you know, great intellectual project, lovely, not really politically engaged, not really wanting to do lots of this kind of fluffy, really commendable, slightly vacuous ethos of how to play, and not a radical commitment to others, which I think is what the anarchism vein would bring. And I finished right when I finished writing the last book manuscript, and I discovered all the tradition of anarchist play studies, and I thought, like, what? How haven't I not looked into this? The best thing about being an academic is that you're constantly reminded that you're an ignorant, and so like
Yeah.
it was a phenomenal way of thinking. Like, I'm an ignorant. Great. I'm totally, yeah. So that's where I see anarchism, and particularly Two Cheers, because Two Cheers, I think it sort of lays the ground for an understanding of anarchism that it's perhaps less committed to the politics of it, and it's much more on the ground personal level, which I think sometimes is missing from anarchist thinking. And it is perhaps what may convince people that it's a way forward to think about how we relate to others. So that's why I'm also a little bit of James C. Scott, but mostly Greber. I think also the man was funny, and I think one should never underestimate the power of a joke well told. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just tell you, my podcast on Graeber is called Everyday Anarchism because it actually comes
Oh
from this idea of the everyday, and you can find this in Kropotkin, I
Yeah,
think, but with Bakunin and Proudhon, there's less of a sense of the everyday and the way that
yeah.
anarchism is. I mean, one of Graeber's big examples is that a conversation is a form of anarchism, which of course, if your definition of anarchism is throwing bombs at government buildings, if that's your definition of anarchism, then the idea that a conversation is a form of anarchism doesn't
No,
work very
doesn't
well.
really work. No, no.
But if you think of all of the different ways, and we started with talking about talking, although I wasn't recording that bit. If you think about a professor in a classroom, or someone giving a political speech, or job training, or you're ordering from a waiter, this
Yeah.
is talking. This is not a conversation, and it cannot and should not be thought of as a form of anarchism. But if you're at the bus stop and you're chatting with someone, or you're doing, and I try and do my podcast interviews this way,
Yeah.
With game studies, my game studies podcast, the one that you are currently on right now.
Yes.
I've got a list of questions, but for my anarchist podcast, I try not to have a list of questions. That's
Of
an
course.
imposition.
Yeah, yeah, and if the questions arise, they will arise from the conversation. They will
Yes.
be mutually agreed. Even I mean, you send me some questions, I agree to them. So I think there's that layer of seeing each other, meeting each other, willing to do that work of moving and understanding the others, while I'm also presenting myself to be understood. And I think
Yeah.
that that's the that's the root of proper, let's call it practical anarchism, right? There's a book published not that long ago called Practical Anarchism, and I think
Yes. No. I had Scott Branson on my podcast to talk about
right.
practical anarchism. Yes, of
Yes.
course.
Okay. That's good. That's good because it's a lovely book, and it's like lowering the barriers, because we all have this idea, probably from propaganda from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. We all have this
Mhm.
idea of the anarchist is the one who killed the Archduke of Prussia or whatever. I can't remember. See, now I'm
It
blanking
doesn't.
because
It
it's
doesn't matter. But the idea that the anarchist is a bomb throwing
yeah,
murderer.
yeah,
Yes, of course. If that's what your definition of anarchism is, then anarchism is bad, and there's no
yeah,
anarchists out there in 2024, or very very few. But that's
yeah.
not that's not good. That's wrong. It's not
No,
interesting.
but if we take it the other direction, we are all everyday anarchists. And the
Yes.
people who are not are the people we should never trust. The people who,
Yes.
right? They're all
Yes.
billionaires and we should not trust them.
Yes, well, I mean, my other critique besides the obvious billionaires is the left wingers who say like, "Oh, once I get into power,
Yeah,
there's going to be rules that are going to straighten things out." And I say like,
yeah,
"No, no, I don't. I don't. I know you think your rules are good, and you're going to punish the billionaires, and you're going to reward the
yeah,
peasantry, and I agree with you. But I don't. I'm not looking for a rules bound boss, even a boss from the left wing. That is
no.
no good.
Even if I agree intellectually with the rules, maybe we
Yes,
don't need them. Maybe,
yes."
maybe there's other ways, right? And I think yeah, I mean, going back to the topic of games, right? I think that's where perhaps I'm in the opposite corner of T's work, right? T builds very much and very beautifully on rules, and I don't.
Yeah.
Or yeah, I do, but in a different way.
Yes.
And that's and I think that's somehow I've always been, perhaps without knowing, closer to this tradition of anarchism. I think so. Partially, I'm Spanish, so the history of anarchism in Spain is very, very. It's taught very much through the lens of the role of the anarchists in the Civil War,
Right.
and the role, or at least one of the roles they had, was the catastrophe that happened in Catalonia, where all of the left wing coalition started just shooting at each other. And so the anarchists have a certain bad reputation because it's maybe when I, at least when I was growing up, they were seen as part of the reason why the left could not put up a barrier to fascism in the Civil War, which is not it's not the true story, but that's how I grew up. So like I guess I never could see myself as an anarchist until I read Greber for the first time, and I thought, oh, that's what I think. So yeah, that which was beautiful. It was always good.
Yeah, and that's it's fascinating to me. I mean, yeah, we'll just keep going on this. Forget the questions. We'll get to them or we will not. It's fascinating to me that you grew up in Spain where the anarchists ruined the coalition because in the English language the socialist and sometimes anarchist writer George Orwell tells this story, and
Yeah.
Orwell is in the poem the something organization for Marxist unity, which is
Yes.
aligned with the anarchists. And when the shooting starts, he Orwell completely blames Stalin and Stalin's
Yes.
allies. And so in the English world, the anarchists are, if you've been reading Orwell, and that's where most
Yeah.
people, the anarchists are the heroes. and it
Yes.
was the other faction who fascism won not against the anarchists, but because the anarchists were defeated. I had no idea in Spain it was the other way around. I had no idea.
So that's when I grew up, right? So I'm 45, 46 soon. So I grew up on the last of the of the sort of Franco educational structures, not with educational program of Franco, but I was born on the first year there
Yeah,
was a constitution in Spain, right?
of
So there was
course.
still a lot of that, and so I remember this Orwell's angle because Ken Loach has this beautiful film called Tierra y Libertad. I guess it's like Earth and Freedom,
Yeah,
or
something
yeah,
like that. Land and
yeah,
freedom, they might call it. It's been a
yeah,
long
Land
time
and
since I've seen it.
Freedom,
But
yeah.
yes.
And that's the first time where I saw, wait a second, they were not. What is this story of the Civil War? That's not what my textbooks told me, because in the textbooks the anarchists are easy to blame because there was no Soviet Union behind them, right?
Yeah.
They were like literal nobodies trying to figure out how to do things. So everybody was to blame of the fall of the left coalition. Stalinist because Stalin, the anarchists because anarchism, the socialists and the social democrats because they were so like everybody had the fault, right? And
Hmm.
it was only at that time where I started realizing, no, there's a different intellectual history to anarchism, but also to Marxism, Trotskyism, all of those left wing, semi communist ideologies that in the early 1930s and 40s they opposed fascism. So it took me a while to learn that other thing from the intellectual milieu where I was growing up. So yeah, I hope Spain has moved a lot, has progressed a lot. So I hope that the educational messages are different now. So let's see.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You said you've been in Denmark for 22 years, so you're
Yeah.
not on the ground with what the
No, I
Spanish
have no idea. I
yeah.
have no idea. I know that many things have changed, but and I'm pretty sure that this has changed too. But stories written by the winners, right? So the winners now are probably a milder version of the left wing. Definitely, the Stalinists are not well regarded, but I don't know. I don't know where the anarchists are, if anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I do obviously. So one of my passions is cinema, and so the great Spanish filmmaker, of course, of the past whatever 4 decades now is Almodovar, who everyone
Yes.
watches, and
Yeah.
he had a film recently. Oh, I forget what it was called. It's about the legacy. Well, it's a very confusing film. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's about the legacy of the Spanish Civil War. So it's a classic Almodovar. And I know I'm probably saying that name wrong. Sorry, but it's
Oh
this
no,
classic
no.
Pedro. Anyways,
Yes,
it's this.
Pedro. Yes, Pedro is the best way of saying
Yes,
it. Yes.
everyone just calls it Pedro. So it's a classic, just absurd, like 1950s Hollywood melodrama of switched babies, and then
Oh, yes.
also they're digging up uh, a mass grave and dealing with the atrocities. And as the movie
Yeah.
goes on, it's like Pedro sort of forgets to care about the baby plot, and it just
Yeah.
entirely becomes about the horrors of fascism. And I must admit, it was celebrated. I watched it very frustrated because I thought I already knew that
Yeah.
Franco was bad.
Yes.
I want to know what happened with these two mothers and how they have to do, like, give me
Yeah.
the lurid life, because it ends up almost the kind of preachy left wing movie
Yeah.
that Ken Loach would make, which I fully support Ken Loach's movies, but Pedro is supposed to be giving us something much wilder.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I remember that. I can't remember the title, but I remember watching it and thinking, realizing that everybody, including Pedro's generation, which is still not a sort of a full on dictatorship generation. He lived obviously the last years of Franco, but he's also a child of the democracy. They have their ghosts that they need to deal with, right? So it's
Yeah,
like that's what a civil war does to you. It's like you will be living with ghosts for centuries.
yeah.
And I guess that was my realization that whatever happens to Spanish culture, we are never going to be able to, not never, but it will take a while before we get rid of the ghost of the Civil War, and everything that came with it. Also, because it's just, again, it's such a paradigmatic, symptomatic war, right? The 20th century, maybe it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I could propose that the 20th century started with the Spanish Civil War. Like that's the first time where the machinery of fascism. So if the Romanticism era ended in 1918, and then we had some years of chaos, then I would say Spanish Civil War, 1936. That's where the 20th century starts full on, right? The apparatus of the state used to promote fascism that decimates populations, that imposes a form of political organization that's based on excluding people. Everything that we know that went almost wrong in the rest of the world with Second World War, we kind of were a test bed for it, and I think escaping that trauma is almost impossible. Which has nothing to do with games. This is great. I love it. Let's just
well,
forget about it.
uh, I mean, I can definitely bring it back to Graeber, which is Graeber's big concern, at least in his last couple of books, was that we had gotten trapped and could think of only a few limited options. If you think of
Yes.
like a Fukuyama end of
Yeah.
history
Yeah.
type thing.
Yeah.
And so, this idea that the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, is sort of the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, it seems to me that this makes sense because after World War One, it's not clear what's going to happen. The Soviet Union has not solidified
Yeah.
into what it is. Whatever eventually America become, the United States, that it happens after World War II. The
Yeah.
current era that we are living in is during FDR's presidency and into World War II. So there's all this sense of what the world was going to be
Yeah.
is uncertain, and you can certainly imagine, you can think, if you are a leftist in the 20s, a worldwide leftist anywhere, that
Yeah.
you can think that the revolution, which was prophesied and then sort of happened in World War One, but was destroyed, that the revolutionary wave is coming back up.
Yeah.
And then it
Yes.
seems like after the Spanish Civil War and after the, frankly, reactionary behavior of Stalin in
Yeah.
the Spanish Civil War, and the
Yeah.
total unwillingness of whatever you want to call them, the liberal democracies, the West, the countries that we think are good now, the
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
United
Yeah.
States and France and everything. Well, they proved themselves to be not, and post Franco Spain. Well, they proved themselves to not be the good countries during the Spanish Revolution,
Yeah.
and that really does seem like it set the stage for the next 70 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
I buy this, Miguel. I buy this.
At least it's to me it's one of the hypotheses. I think the 20th century started many times, like the 21st century started many
Yes.
times, and I think it's a productive way of putting these conflicts into a broader perspective and to draw alternative histories of movements, of ways of thinking, of ways of people connecting to each other. You know, uh, that I think are better than the standard histories that we like to tell. I'm always I'm always wary of standard histories because they are nothing about history can be standard, and every time we standardize it into like this is how it was, bam. Not sure. No, I don't think that's always the case. Can we think about time and our collective history in a different perspective? And so this is one of my pet peeves.
Yeah. No, mine too. And then the because I have taught high school, so then
Ooh.
the educators project is to standardize history for
Yep.
for an adolescent. And I must admit, so the story I tell this a lot. I don't know if I told it yet on this podcast. Is a student raised her hand one time and said, when did the United States population turn against the Vietnam War? And I must have talked for 10 minutes about polling and elections and the will of the people and not knowing the answer. And when I was done, she was like, "So you don't know?" And I was like, "Well, yeah,
Basically, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Oh, high school students, those are great. I mean, terrible to teach, but great because they would
yeah,
always tell you the truth,
yeah."
or at least the
All
good
right,
ones
shall
will
we?
tell you the truth.
Shall we talk about games
Yes, let's
now?
talk about games.
All right.
Absolutely, yes.
So, first, why don't you tell us who you are? I will record a little intro
Yeah.
and try and edit this so they will. But go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
All right. So, my name is Miguel Sicart, and I'm, I guess, I have a new title which sounds super fancy. I'm a professor of digital play. Don't ask me what it means, but it sounds good. At the IT University of Copenhagen, which is the smallest Danish university, but it's a place where we've been doing game studies for the last 25 years almost. So it's kind of one of the European birthplaces of game studies. I'm originally from Spain. I have a background in the humanities. My degrees are on literary theory, but I studied almost everything that was humanities based. Ethics, mostly when I studied philosophy. There's also some linguistics to it. Linguistics is actually my one true love. Linguistics and literature are my true loves. If I won the lottery, I would probably become a linguist. That's the kind of people I am. That's just things that's what I would do if I didn't have to work. Um, but somehow I always had a fascination. I've had a fascination with computers since I was a kid, and I was lucky to have some mentors in at university at the moment where I should start my PhD. With that said, well, why don't you study games using literary theory? It's a new hip thing. This is 2001, and then new hip thing, and then I did so, and I ended up going to Copenhagen because one of my Spanish advisors friends was in Copenhagen, a professor called Susana Tosca, and then I came here and it was lovely, so I stayed here. They allowed me to stay, and I've been here for 22 years now. So it's a long period of time, and I've been connected to what used to be the Center for Computer Games Research, founded by Espen Orseth, who's one of the parents of game studies, who was my PhD advisor. So I can obviously only say good things about him, uh, particularly after I defended. But he was my colleague also for 20 years, right? So I actually only have mostly good things to say. And then now it's called the Center for Digital Play because we broaden up and we do way more things than just games. We do games, but we also do like artificial intelligence and player modeling and all kinds of things that are use games kind of as an excuse to understand the phenomenon of play. So that's who I am, and I've written a number of books, and I know I like soccer and basketball and cinema and books.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, look, you're on the right podcast, for sure. Or at least you're talking to the right podcast host. At least whether you're on the right podcast, who knows? For
Yeah,
soccer and
absolutely.
cinema and books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Best things in the world.
Yes, for me as well. So I had actually already reached out to you to have you on the podcast, and I was reading your book, Playing Software, which is the most recent book, right?
Yeah, it is. Yes. Yeah.
Which I quite enjoyed. And I was thinking that one of the things that we would maybe talk about would be the work of Lugones. And then
Yeah.
this podcast started because I talked to T. Nguyen for my other podcast, the Anarchism Project. But before you and I spoke to T again, and we talked about Bernard Suits. And then towards the end of that podcast, he said, "Oh, games are actually easy. We've sort of solved games. What's tricky is play." And I said, of course, like, "Oh, well, I use Graeber, to understand play." And he said, "Well, who's really interesting is Lugones." And I had this interview with you on the books, and I thought, oh well. If the problem is how to figure out play and we need to use Lugones for it, I know who to talk to about
that
this. So
is that's good timing. That is good
yes,
timing. I have to
yes,
say
this
yes.
conversation with T was less than a week ago, actually.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So tell us about Maria Lugones and how she can help us understand play.
All right. So I discovered Luganes almost by accident. So I wrote this thing called Play Matters, this book called Play Matters in 2014. And I thought, okay, I've covered everything that's coverable about play and play studies in the Western world in languages that I can read. So I'm kind of pretty satisfied with it. And at some moment, I think around 2017, somebody, and I wish I could remember whom, somebody put in front of my eyes this article by Lugones called Playfulness, World Traveling. I forgot the title. I always call it a playfulness paper. And I read it and I realized most of my assumptions were incorrect. And I want to do something with this work because this is what I mean by play. This is why this is the vocabulary and the entry point to break down the assumptions that I had and to build something new about it. So I'm not very much of the type of author who also reads a lot around the authors. So I don't know more from Maria Luganes that she was an Argentinian philosopher, but studied and worked in the United States. So she considered herself a U.S. woman of color. I think she once defined herself like that. She
Hmm.
taught in the U.S. most of the time, and that her work is primarily focused on decolonial feminism, which I've read some of the other work, and to me this is an interesting analogy with David Graeber because Graeber is not a play scholar, but has written perhaps some of the best work in games and play. And Luganes is not a games or play scholar, but this particular text is all about producing this critique and constructing an alternative that is, I think, more productive than any other work of play studies ever since. This is a work from the 1980s. Some things are. It's not about studying games. It works for studying games, but it's about studying. It's really about studying play. And so the whole argument, or the way I read the whole argument, because it's a very rich text. So I think everybody can read it in different ways. The way I read it is a foundation for being is the capacity to do world traveling. Loving world traveling is a positive thing, which means to be able to travel to other people's worlds and to recognize them, the other people, as they are in their worlds and exposing ourselves to them while we travel. That is the loving part. So that's how we get to understand other people. That's how we get to connect to other people. And for Luganes, the way you do this world traveling, the way you build this connection or this entanglement with other people is through playfulness. Playfulness understood. So this is the genius thing of that text. Playfulness, I think we can all recognize that in order to relate to other people, we also need to be a little bit playful in this vague sense. Let's not define it, right? We need to relax. We need to be a little bit loose. We cannot, nobody would like us if we just try to impose ourselves on others. We also need to listen. A good conversation is also listening. And so she tries to define this playfulness. And in order to define it, she goes back to what she considers to be sort of the root of the understandings of play in Western culture. So she goes to Huizinga and Gadamer. And she doesn't like them because at the heart of both Huizinga and Gadamer is agonism, is competition, is rules in place that have to be followed in order to get a result that puts somebody in a dominant position over others. And she doesn't even like role playing because role playing is not this open and honest movement towards others. It's the pretense, the almost like the cheating in this kind of play because you are not being earnest about how you're relating to others. So she defines playfulness then as opposed to that tradition of Western game studies or play studies, as a form of world traveling where you lovingly present to others, where there are rules, but the rules are not important, where you can laugh at yourself, where you can modify the context, modify the situations, where you can appropriate this kind of relation, and then at that moment you can start building new selves and new worlds. And that is to me where Lugones is important, because she allows us not to think about competition. She allows us to get rid of role play, and I disagree with her on that one, but that's a different story. Um, and she proposes a an understanding of playfulness, that it's all about the relations we build to others and how we keep them working, how we keep them going. Even for those scholars who worked on play, who thought about play as this kind of mode of relating to others, like Goffman. Goffman looked at how people relate and played games, and that's great. Rules were fundamental for them. For Lugones, one of the key insights is rules are not important. We can break them if we need to, and that is, we can break them if we need to. That is so important, because that is play. Play is, I'm going to accept these rules, but if I don't like them, I'm also going to break them, because there's something more important than the rules, which is play. And there's a good tradition in the anthropological study of play that connects exactly with that. So Linda Hughes, when she studied the playground games, right, the Rui rules, she has this beautiful sentence that I teach my students, that is, when the rules take over, the activity stops being fun. And that is the core of the problem, and that's the core of all of our issues with play theory. That we say play, we think games are rules, let's follow the rules. And what if we didn't? What if the core of play is world traveling and not rule abiding? And that's where it all started. And that's why I think T might be onto it, that if we want to understand the play, we need to work on at least Lugones as a starting point, and perhaps a different tradition of thinkers and that are not game scholars, that move in different directions. I try to do that in my most recent book, and I'll keep working on it, I think, for a while. Okay, that was
Yeah.
now, for somebody who had just said that a conversation should be a conversation and a back and forth. That was a long monologue I've just thrown at you.
Yes, well, sure. Well, I lapsed into interviewer mode where I ask the question and you do the talking there. But
Yeah,
I'll try and recover. So, I mean, for me, and this I'm very informed by David Graeber here, although I've probably been doing this so long. But one of the things that Graeber likes to do is to say, like, okay, we've got these two things that seem to be in conflict with one another, and people are asserting both of them, and so they either can't both be true. There must be something complicated, or we've got these problems. You can think of this as a deconstruction or structuralism, whatever, it doesn't matter. And the point is, this comes from me. So I read this book, the Grasshopper by Bernard Suits, which I hadn't read. I read it recently, even before I discovered Teen Nguyen's work. And the Suits book, which listeners of this podcast will have heard an entire discussion of it with me and T, is lovely. It's brilliant, and it has a definition of games in which play is not involved in the slightest. And I can just utterly demolish this definition easily with, from personal experience. So one of his quintessential examples is a race. And I did run when I was younger, a marathon, one marathon. I loved it. It was an amazing experience. These days I do almost all of my running on the soccer pitch, and there's no there's no way that a marathon is a game, I would say, or I would rather say there's no play involved. So it's a
yes,
Suitsian game, but it
yeah,
has no play at all. And when he's challenged on this, Suits writes an addendum to the Grasshopper and
yeah,
says, we just have to acknowledge that play and games are not actually related concepts. And this for
yeah,
me is this thing that I'm picking up on, because this is where we have a contradiction. Because yes, when people say play and games, they use them interchangeably. that can't be right. But Suits' claim that playing games have nothing to do with one another, that can't be right either
No,
for
no.
me.
I think there was a I like the Grasshopper as a really entertaining work of sophist game studies, right? So it's like this is the work of a very excellent thinker who's doing sophism. So let's just work with this kind of minimal descriptions, almost to eliminate human experience, to have this beautiful apparatus that it's true in its argument, but not necessarily true. And this is okay. This can sound like a massive critique because like Suits is living a revival right now, and it's fine, but like I don't think there's no space in his work. There's no space for pleasure. There's no space for the pains of play. There's no, as you say, there's no space for play. There's no understanding that really. So my provocations. You say a marathon. I think puzzles are not games. They're
Yes,
perfect
agreed.
Sootsian games, but puzzles are not games. You cannot play
Yes,
a puzzle. No, forget it. It's a game,
yeah,
but no, it's not a game. It's actually not a game. We are. It's a misnomer. So
yeah.
puzzles are not games, and puzzles in video games kill video games because they're not games. They're puzzles.
I can't. Oh, this is such a relief because I hate puzzles in video games. I mean, I one of my most beloved one of my most beloved game series, of course, like everyone else, is The Legend of Zelda. Until it becomes too puzzle based, and
Yes.
and what I do these days is I'll just look up the solution to the puzzles
Yeah.
because I'm not interested.
Yeah.
I don't do puzzles outside of games. I don't want to do puzzles inside of games. I need to step back though briefly for about the sophism thing. So
Yes.
you described as sophism. I completely agree. Now, the analytic philosophers, which is the tradition that Suits is in, they will claim that
Yeah.
they are not sophists and that's a break from the Greeks, but that's wrong. And it is a form of it is a form of sort of rules based argumentation where the goal is not to find the truth, but to win. And that is
Yeah.
because sophism is a form of agonism. It comes from the ancient Greek concepts. And I've got an episode coming out. The episode after this is about agonism in ancient Greek society, which says it doesn't matter what it is running a marathon, war, music, philosophy.
Yeah.
Every single one of these things in ancient Greek society is simply a competition,
Yes.
which is fine. You can do it that way, but it means your artworks are not going to be the most beautiful. They're going to be the ones that win. And it means your
Yeah.
philosophy is not going to be true. It's
No.
going to be the one that traps your opponent in a corner, which, if that's what
Yeah.
you want, great. You trapped your opponent in the corner, but that's not what I'm looking for in philosophy.
No. Exactly. And I okay, I'm happy that it resonates with you because I often get in trouble. I have good colleagues and friends who are analytic philosophers, and part of the intellectual apparatus of analytic philosophy is great because I mean, there's a proper method to it. It's not. I love French philosophy, but they're all writers and poets, so maybe they should have just done poetry instead. But that's a different story, right? So like there's like, but all of it's at the service of squeezing. The things that are left out more often are human experience, and I don't
Yeah.
understand philosophy without understanding human experience. Like I don't. Then it becomes a puzzle game. Then it's the puzzle game of figuring out the best adjusted counter argument to the counter argument. So it all becomes this tight, sealed progression of almost programmatic or procedural, step by step argumentation that leads to something that is hermetically closed both to the outside and from the outside. It's the it's the box of Hellraiser, and like somebody should just like unlock it and get out these yeah pleasure demons out of it. So yeah.
Yeah, so this is a huge contrast between Suits's book and T. Nguyen's book. Is that
Yeah.
almost all of Suits's examples are thought experiments where
Yeah.
he makes up people and describes how they might act. And almost all of T's examples are living things that he has done or seen
Yep.
people do. And so in Suits, if someone is going to be playing a game, they're going to be a made up character with a pretend name.
Yeah.
And T is going to say, I was playing this game last night, and
Yep.
here's how it works. And that is how T has adapted the analytic tradition to life.
Yes.
And that
Yeah.
shows you that Suits' analytic tradition was valuable because it can be
Yeah.
used that way, but Suits did
No.
not
No. No.
integrate it with life.
And the work that T does, I think the one of the, to me, two great takeaways from T's book is that connection of Switzian play with life. I think that is one of the,
Yes.
that is really one of the two main contributions. The other one being the notion of the art form of agency. I
Yes.
think those two things are the, okay. This is what we didn't know about games that now we know. Um, but that's when it also gets messy because it's a very bad Switzian book in the sense that it breaks with its tradition in so
Yes.
many places. And I'm pretty sure that he has not made some friends with some. And I haven't checked, but some analytic philosophers might not be very happy with the way some of the arguments are presented because they are porous. They are not this kind of clean. They he wins a lot of arguments by rhetoric, by the beautiful writing, by the example, the
Yeah.
beauty of the example, rather than by the coherence of the argument. And that to me is good philosophy. As much as I could disagree with it sometimes, but like it's good philosophy. It's really good philosophy.
Anyone who has been listening to this podcast from the beginning knows that I am not only not from the analytic philosophy tradition, but it has taken me my entire career to finally admit that some parts of the analytic philosophy tradition are in some ways useful. So I
Yeah.
this is not the fact that there must be analytic philosophers who dislike T's book is not a problem for me.
No, no,
Quite
no,
the
no. It's
quite the
totally
opposite.
okay. Yes. Well, analytic philosophy is a little bit what they say about statistical models, right? All models are wrong, but some of them are useful. So
Yes.
it's the
Yes.
same.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're running out of time because we had such a delightful time talking about Graeber and the Spanish Civil War. So
Which is
what I'm
great.
going to
Yeah.
do now is just make you answer my question that I haven't figured out yet, but I'm working on, which is,
Yes.
and this is the question that has come from reading Suits and reading T's work and reading your work. I haven't gotten to Lugones yet. I need to do that soon. You and T have both pushed me in that direction. So it goes something like this. Um, Assuming Suits is wrong, that play and games have nothing to do with
Hmm.
one another. Um, I almost went with Wittgenstein. Leaving Wittgenstein aside, how is it? And this is a problem drawn from my own life. How is it that what I want to do is play? I love play,
Hmm.
but I play by far most freely within the boundary of rules. And
Yep.
why is it that, although from an analytic perspective, it seems that play and games have nothing to do with one another? And if you think about Graeber, not the peace and utopian rules, but the what's the point if we don't have fun? And he
Yes.
defines play as basically just like the freedom to go
Yeah.
wherever you want. But to use Suits, if I'm on a soccer field and I'm free to go wherever I want with the ball, that's quite boring. I need the
Yes.
rule. I need the rule that I can only use my feet, and
Yeah.
also that there's 11 other people who are trying to move it in a different way. And once I get rules that bind my play, I
Yeah.
become free in a way that when I'm just standing on a field with a ball, I am not free. So how do we
Yeah.
unite the freedom that
Yeah.
comes from the restriction of rules and how play? And I know people who don't feel this way. I know
Yeah.
people for whom rules stifle their play, but
Yeah.
rules unlock my play, and I don't have a good answer yet. So here, you have 10 minutes. Can you tell me?
Absolutely, I'll try. If we stay, you mentioned soccer, so now we are done because I'm going to just talk about soccer.
That's fine.
The
That's fine with me.
the greatest goal in the history of soccer was against the rules. That's Maradona's goal against the British or the English. Sorry, apologies
Oh.
to Scotland and Wales. But that is the greatest goal of the history of the sport, and it totally broke the rules. And I'll die on that hill that there's no better goal because that goal defines the pleasure and the game of football because it's not scored according to the rules, and because this genius could understand the rules, understand when to break them, not take them seriously, and then not only that, but make fun of it when he called it the hand of God, la mano de Dios. So why is it that rules allows us to play? Well, I one of my points of disagreement with Graeber, particularly with that piece in What is the Point If We Can't Have Fun, is that too much freedom, first, does not exist, and second, it might lead to something like cruelty. And he mentions that in that piece as
Yeah.
well, that there's an element of play that we cannot take into, or we cannot forget that it has that play can be cruel. And I think that play that can be cruel is the excess of freedom. We need rules to get us started. The same as we need rules for conversations, the same as we need rules for social life. We even have unspoken rules for forms of play like flirting or sex. There are rules. Maybe we don't write them, maybe we don't canonize them like in games, but they are a starting point for us to think about the convergence between games and play. We need to think that in classic Switzian way, rules are the ends of the activity. In a play approach, they are the starting point. They are the thing that unifies us all, that puts us all together, 22 people on a football pitch, and then we can start playing. And that means that sometimes we're not going to follow the rules. We are just going to bend the rules. We are going to ignore them. We are going to play with them because they are a starting point. They are what binds us together. And that's when we can start having these conversations about what are the role of rules and what are the not the role of rules. Now, this is perhaps a kind of a not totally satisfying answer, but I think I think the interesting thing is that most games do not want us to play with them. Most games will reject the idea or refuse to be played with because ends, the rules, are more important than the means, which is to play. Great games are those in which we are just setting up a stage and then we are playing. And that play involves relation, it involves communication, it involves this notion of entanglement with other people, with other agencies, regardless of the rules. So we would play even if we don't have rules. And just to go back to the example of soccer, you don't need a referee or a pitch to play soccer. You just need, I don't know, six other people and one ball, and then you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And the same with almost all kinds of sports. And that is the problem with video games. But that's a different story that maybe we can talk about at some other moment because sometimes video games are just not very playful.
Yeah, especially, I was attacking the most recent Zelda game in a class, and one of my TAs stood up to defend it, and he explained, and I thought this was a good argument, that some puzzle that I was objecting to that he had solved by using a bomb arrow and blowing Link across a chasm when you were
Yep.
supposed to construct a particular machine. And I said, I mean, sort of. On the one hand, yes, that's play and that works. On the other hand, that's that play is almost antagonistic to the game. It's not a
Yeah.
game where you get to decide how to cross the chasm. It's a game where there's one clear and obvious way to cross the chasm and one secondary kind of
Yeah.
puzzle rule breaker, but there's not
No.
a third way. If you
No.
think about all of the different ways there are to score goals on the soccer pitch, it's not, oh, there's the normal way and then there's a secondary way and then you're done. It's
Yeah.
nothing like that. And then we can talk about complexity and randomness and chaos and all this stuff. But it is going to have to be in another conversation.
But so let's go back to soccer for a second, because I help coach my kids under 13s, so I've been watching everything that can be watched about football coaching. And I, of course, went to one of the greatest, which is Pep Guardiola. And of course, because, I'm also sort of sentimentally attached to the club he used to manage. But um, he has this interview where he says that his job as a coach is to facilitate players playing. And that to me was mind blowing, because we tend to think about coaches as this kind of like, and particularly Guardiola, as this kind of chess player who's going to just like make these positions. Like, no, 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 no. I'm going to create structures so my players can play. And I think it worked better on one of his teams than on the others, because
Yeah, see, well, our Mikel Arteta has clearly not learned that lesson because Mikel Arteta wants absolute automatons
no, I know, I
on
know, but
his
that's
pitch.
and I like
Whereas Arsene Wenger it
yes,
truly embodied this idea of letting his players play, of creating a structure that one
yeah,
can play within. Look, I could not feel more passionately about this. The current coach of the US national soccer team spends a lot of time, and if you know anything about soccer, and you may or may not if you're listening to this, national soccer teams cannot be chess masters. They cannot have automatons. They see the players for a few days and then they play for 2 weeks and then they go away. And this man, Greg Berhalter, he will spend his time coaching players on where to be down to within a meter, which is precise. Maybe you can win games that way, but it is to me antithetical to the idea of soccer. If you're playing unbeautiful
mm,
soccer, you might as well give up and play some horrible game like American football. But you can't even win that way with a national team. It's literally impossible. No human being can get that precise if they've only been trained in it for a day or two. And so he just fundamentally misunderstands his job. And whether Pep is true to that claim that I agree with you about the claim that Pep makes, whether he's true to that claim, especially at Man City.
no, he's not true to that in Man City. They are
Yeah.
they are fairly they're fairly mechanical, but I like the idea, right? Because we go back to Kreber, and what's the point if we can't have fun?
What's the point if we can't have fun?
And that
I
is,
agree.
a game is an instrument for having fun. But at some moment, having fun may mean ignoring the game. And that's okay. That's fine. We are not spoil sports. We are not cheats. We are just playing. And that is absolutely great. That's what has value, not the game. The game is absolutely relevant. It's an excuse, right? We all need an excuse. Games gives us that excuse. Rules gives us that excuse. It's a way for grown-ups to allow ourselves some time to be silly and to laugh and to be others and to be with others. And I think that's the whole point, right? Having fun,
Yeah,
whatever
but
fun is. Yeah,
what you're describing is freedom, and the
absolutely.
fact
Yeah,
that it comes out of rules
yeah,
is, I think, one of the most difficult things for people to grasp and understand.
yeah. It's the paradox. It's a paradoxical position, but it's a paradox that, unless when we start thinking about it, it breaks our brain. But we
But
don't.
we
When
can
we
live it
don't,
so easily.
exactly. And to a certain extent, these are not the beauty of games. To me, is that the rules are mutually accepted, and that if the game is played for real fun, if I change the rules, if you understand that we are having fun, then you're also going to be fine with changing the rules. And that is radical. That is the true radical nature of games. In no other societal structure we can, right now, we can get to that agreement that I'm having fun, you're having fun, the rules are kind of in the way, let's change the rules. We cannot do that. This, no, but games allows us to do that. And that's why rules are so important to games, because they allow us to change them if we want to have fun. And that's why it all boils back to, or it all goes back to anarchism to a certain extent. They are perfect anarchist practices, games, when played for fun.
I agree, but I don't. Well, the group I play with now, often when the ball goes out, if someone is chasing it down, it rolls over an inch. And in my old group, someone would shout, "Oh, just play it," so that we could all
Yeah,
have fun. And this group, they immediately stop and maybe have
yeah,
an argument about it. And because it seems that to them, to me, as an anarchist and a scholar of play, they have let the rules become more important than the fun. I haven't asked them about it, but I think what they would say is if you let the rules go, this is the slippery slope argument that's often
yeah,
used against anarchism. If you
yes,
break the rules once, the entire system will collapse, and the next thing we'll have is, oh, I don't know, anarchy. And the fact that they can't see that there's room,
yeah,
to let the ball
yeah,
roll out and kick it back in because it's more fun. And that doesn't mean we're all going to start using our hands. It
yeah,
just means we've adapted the rules a little bit for fun. But
yeah.
clearly, other people don't feel this way. Some of
But
them don't.
no, I agree, and I see it every day, and I think I wonder if what we are missing is not a proper pedagogics of play, in the sense that
Uh,
there's a lot of teaching about games these days. I'm guilty of that, but there's really not a lot of teaching about play,
that play.
right? So it's like even when you go to a game school, right? What you teach people is, oh, you have to make this game, and then you start by making these rules,
Rules, yes.
right? And back when I taught game design, this is, I last taught game design almost 10 years ago. But like when I taught game design, the first thing my students needed to define is what kind of experience did they want players to go through. Everything else, secondary to it. Instruments for that experience. Because if you start with rules and like what can the player do, and you immediately constrained. And I think we have a general pedagogic of play that it's all about this fake notion of fairness, and fairness determined by the rule and not by the relations. And again, this is all what's her name, Linda Hughes. She already had these observations when looking at kids playing on playgrounds, that's it's the relations that define the activity and not the rules. That's almost a verbatim quote from her. And we are not teaching relations, we are teaching rules, and that's why we get people who are boring to play with, because no, just move on, break things, but break them together, not don't break
Yes.
them against others, right? So it's
Yes.
like it's the commitment to others, and the commitment to share fun, that I think it's the key to it. And this is, now we can circle back to Luganis. That's what Luganis gives us, right? Playfulness is about this world traveling to others. Without that, it does not exist. It's a different thing. There's many other ways of being in the world. She's not dogmatic about it. But if we really want to do that playful engagement with others, we have to world travel. We have to acknowledge them. And games can give us a way in that direction. But we should not commit to the games. We should commit to others.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Miguel. This has been fantastic.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation, and I know it's great because we didn't follow any of your questions, which were fantastic, and maybe some other day we can talk about them.
Some other day, absolutely. I will be in touch. Thank you
Yeah,
again.
thank you.